Going to put it on for 30 seconds.
Right.
We're having Jon first.
I'm live now. Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Miners' Hall in Barnsley. 40 years on from the strike, and still people active and looking after members and the general public, and that's what we want to see from our unions. My name is Bill Adams. I'm listed down here as a long-standing asbestos campaigner. I'm not sure I'm as long-standing as some of us in the room, but it's very nice to be here, and I'm really pleased that Catherine asked me. This event is organised by, with banners held high in conjunction with the NUM, and we've got some great speakers tonight. We're also going out online for those who are joining online, and I'm sure that those people will have an opportunity to ask questions. But without further ado, asbestos has been a plague in our time. So many thousands of people have died from meningococcus and all other asbestos-related illnesses. And I know that some people in this room have done some great work in helping those individuals, and we'll be coming on to that in a little bit. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Jon Trickett, MP. John, me and you go back a long time. In 1996, I think you were elected as MP.
Yeah.
So it's great to have you here, and I can remember, brother, that you're always a man of your word, and you weren't afraid to shout up when you thought you were in the right. Something that I've always admired about you. So you've got the floor, John. Thanks very much.
Bill, it's great to see you. I'm always in the right. So by that measure, then I'm always speaking out, and I believe that is our role. Is the microphone working before I get into what I'm going to say? Look, it's great to see you all here, and to welcome everybody who's watching this online too. It's been streamed live thanks to our friends in the CWU and elsewhere. And it's great to see all of you. My background, whenever I'm asked what is my profession, I say I'm an MP or a politician. I say I'm a plumber. And I worked in the building industry for many, many years. And I come from a family largely of manual workers. My uncle died as a young man from an asbestos-related cancer, and it's a terrible disease to see a fit human being and a close relative, somebody we loved, slowly fading away. It's a terrible, terrible illness. And when I worked in the industry, asbestos was all around. And I clearly remember mixing powdered asbestos in a large tin with water, mixing it round, and the asbestos the dust was in the air. It got on your clothes, it got in your overalls. You took it home, you didn't realise it, the family was exposed as well to asbestos. We had no idea how dangerous it was at that time. Nobody told us. And we mixed asbestos because in the clothing factories of Leeds, they used to have steam presses. And the steam pipes had to be lagged, insulated. And it was mixed in open vats and then plastered on, and we did that. And then when I was working on building sites, obviously many of the buildings were lathered in asbestos, so it's something that's close to my heart. In a way, it's a miracle. I never, so far, touch wood, developed any lung problems as a consequence of my exposure to it. But as you know, it can come anytime. It can lie dormant for years in your lungs and suddenly creep up on you and you're in trouble. So that's my background, and this is something I feel strongly about. I don't know if everybody who's listening to this knows that there are more asbestos-related deaths per 100,000 people in our country than any other country in the world. 5,000 people die every year, it's been said by the HSE, from asbestos-related cancers. And it's been estimated that there is more live asbestos in our buildings than in any other country per 100,000 in the population. We are seriously neglecting one of the great problems which was left by a previous generation. And it was left by employers and bosses who didn't give a damn about the lives of people who worked for them. And I saw that on a daily basis when I was working in the building industry. And that continues today. What makes it worse is the fact that the organisation which is there to protect workers, HSE, has suffered from major cutbacks, so that the number of inspections which are taking place about asbestos have declined radically in recent years. And the number of prosecutions for people who employ others working with asbestos or in buildings which are riddled with asbestos almost collapsed away. And yet there are these thousands of people every year dying from asbestos-related problems. This is a serious issue, and it's good that Banners Held High, which is a great initiative in Wakefield, in my area, has brought this particular meeting together. We need to figure out how to fight that. Now, let me make a bigger argument, because it's the working class of our country who created our wealth. They say that we're the fifth richest country in the world. If we are, that wealth doesn't trickle down to working people. Working people have had the wages cut, the salaries reduced. Often workers, I've just explained, and the employers simply take the money to themselves and enrich themselves. It's a country which works for the wealthy, but doesn't work for working class people. And yet it's the workers who create the wealth of our country. Now, for too long, I feel that the Labour movement has been on the back foot. I won't include everybody in this room, but some of our leaders have been on the back foot. They've been in retreat. They haven't really been prosecuting the case. I think it's time to be bold. I think it's time to speak out. And on an issue like asbestos, every single instinct in our country should be on the side of workers are exposed to risk, and on the side of the NHS, which treats those people who develop mesothelioma and the other cancer-related diseases. It's time to be bold. It's time to be on the front to attack the injustice in our society. That's the big picture. Now, what has happened, which I think is very interesting, apart from the strikes we've seen in the last 12 months or so, which is very encouraging, because people have found their union again and back against the cuts in wages. But what's quite interesting in relation to asbestos, the HSE has been cut back, as I've just said, but the TUC has organised union representatives in workforces all over our country. I think there are 600 this very week, inspecting the buildings in which they work, to see whether there are any problems to the workforce. Whether it's the rack concrete in the schools and other buildings, whether it's fire hazards, whether it's dangerous conditions, or whether it's asbestos. And why shouldn't workers organised by trade unions stand up and say the conditions in which we're expected to work are totally unacceptable and we will not put up with it? So I think that's a very, very welcome development indeed, and we need more. We need more of that. So let me finish with this. My experience as somebody who came from a working class family and a manual worker, there are less than 10 of us now in Parliament, has been such that I was exposed, as all the people I worked with were, to asbestos. Sadly, some of them have died or become seriously ill. I suppose my final point is this. This weekend is Workers' Memorial Day. We remember all those people injured or died at work because of slack bosses. Bosses who didn't really care about what the workers worked in as long as they were getting profits and dividends. And so this week is an important week for this event tonight, for Workers' Memorial Day, and for the fact that 600 trade unionists up and down the country looking at the workplaces where they're currently working to see if it's dangerous. And I always think, stop for a moment, grieve for our work colleagues, our brothers and our sisters, our neighbours and our friends who've been injured or died because of poor employment practices. Yes, grieve, yes, shed a tear, but also let's feel a sense of anger that even in this century, where it's supposed to be such a modern world that we're now living in, workers are expected to be exposed to these conditions and to suffer, sometimes to be injured, even to die. Let's turn that anger into a positive direction and say to our leaders, in the labour movement and beyond, we're not going to accept any longer the fact that this is an economy which promotes wealthy, because it's the workers who create that wealth. Thanks very much for listening to me this evening, and good luck with the meeting, and good luck to Banners Held High, which is a great organisation. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, John. And thanks for everything you've done in the past, and I know that you'll still be, you'll still carry on the fight in the next few years. As we say, you know, lots of people from industry have been getting this disease for years and years, sometimes 30, 40 years and longer after they've inhaled this asbestos. And so the time period is very difficult for people. And not only is it heavy industry, but we're now seeing new cases coming through, particularly in schools. I'm told that people ripping up bars and making new pubs are also quite susceptible to asbestos, where there's no records, and also where there's subcontractors that are on site, obviously not taking as much notice as maybe a bigger construction company. So we've really got to get it out to people about the dangers of this. And so I'd like to bring in Chris Kitchen now, who's the General Secretary of the NUM. Are you not speaking? Sorry, Chris. I've got you down here.
Well, good evening, everybody. Obviously, we have, unfortunately, a problem with asbestosis from Mineworkers, although we do have a big problem getting DWP to accept that there are any asbestos used down the mines. But our main concern is obviously main chest disease that most of our members do, such as pneumoconiosis. Once again, a disease that, once it starts, is a progressive disease, disabling, and ruins people's lives. And that's on top of what we thought at the time was actually a good health surveillance system. Obviously, within the mining industry, we've got loads of health and safety legislation, Mines and Quarries Act on dust suppression, which board complied with, although they kept changing the minimum levels of ventilation and when it suited them at times. But ironically, we also had a periodic chest X-ray scheme, and towards the back end of the industry, the union was actively trying to get every member X-rayed. Under the old British Coal days, it was the current employees and former employees all got an X-ray. After privatisation, the private companies kept that going for a couple of years, then decided this is costing us money, why should we care about former employees of British Coal? We're a new company now and it's coming out of our profits. But we've always had a problem with, if you think every miner that was underground, we all had to have medical before we started in the pits. There was quite a stringent medical, and we were all past A1 to go underground. So it's hard to understand how, when you have an X-ray every 4 or 5 years, and you get the report back that says no significant change. Well, how do you end up with pneumoconiosis then 20 years after you finished at the pit if there's no significant change? And we've asked the question, and unfortunately we can't seem to get an answer unless Mr. Skidmore can enlighten us. Is that no significant change from the first X-ray that I had as a 16-year-old when I entered the pit? Or is that no significant change from the X-ray I had 4 years ago? Because it's a progressive disease. If you're only checking back 4 years, there won't be much of a change. It's the cumulative effect over the years from when you started as a 16, 17-year-old to when you finished at the pit. And once you've got the dust retention, it's only going to get worse even though you're no longer at the pit. We have a bit of a standing joke where they try and turn people down for claiming because they don't want to accept that it's because they worked at the pit because they finished 20 years ago. Well, so what did they do? Sit in coal house, shoveling coal from one end to other for 20 years of the retirement. You know, they've had no more exposure, but the damage was done at the time that they worked. And unfortunately, it wasn't picked up early enough. So we're really keen to take part in this workshop, you know, because asbestosis, silicosis, and pneumoconiosis all come under the prescription of D1. Although they're all slightly different, but they are all disabling and terrible diseases. And once you've got, you know, it's something you don't want to have that claim. You definitely don't want to have the diagnosis to be able to fill that claim form in, because no matter how much money they give you, it's never going to be enough. So thanks for everyone that's attended tonight, and obviously thanks for those that joined online for showing interest, because it is a fight that we are going to have to keep pushing to try and get justice, because people don't know that they were exposed. It's a silent killer in many cases. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Chris, for that kind of general approach from the NUM. I know that you've been at the forefront of a fight to protect people. Next speaker, Chris Skidmore from the Yorkshire area. Chris and I have known each other for a long, long time, and every time I got a phone call from him, I knew I was in for a couple of hours. His intrinsic delving into cases and representing his members is first class, and I've never actually known anybody, get the bit between his teeth and not let go. So, Chris, thanks for your work representing people. I know you never, ever back down on any cases, and it'd be interesting to hear some of the examples that you can tell us tonight. So, thanks very much, mate.
Thanks very much for that, Bill. Thanks very much, Chris. I suppose we have to start at the beginning. A long time ago, we got involved with attending public meetings of an organisation called IAC. It's the Advisory Council to the Government on Industrial Disease. And I've got to say, it's better to be controversial, Bill, wouldn't it? It's over full of academics. It's not full of people who actually work in the environment. And I had an interesting conversation with the former chairman, who was a professor, but at least he took our point of view. In order to understand how somebody works in something, then they have to get into their, what we call it, occupation. Jon Trickett touched on it, about the occupation. But then we have to start wondering how academics get into this line of work, because they've never been exposed to it, they've never worked in it. And most of the people that they actually talk about the statistics in a book. They don't actually meet anybody that's ill. They don't actually meet anybody unless they happen to come to one of the meetings where they can see what damage has been done to somebody. And what we call the advice that we give to government is via the Department for Work and Pension. And a minister, it might interest you, just I'll give you, I don't like talking so much about statistics, but a local MP who's tried her best to help us out, she asked a question: how many mining-related claims for industrial disease has there been in the last 10 years, bearing in mind that the industry has been misleading? And it might interest you to know that in the last 10 years there have been 34,000 claims submitted. The damage statistic in that is that over 19,000 of them have been turned down. And coming on to the part that's we're really all here tonight to be talking about is, of course, pneumoconiosis, asbestosis and silicosis. And for the reasons best known to themselves, they lump them under one umbrella, and yet they look different on X-ray or slides or CT scans. I mentioned to Catherine a while ago that we're finding something else that's coming out to bite us now called sarcoidosis. And you might think to yourself, sarcoidosis? One in 110,000 people get this disease. And America seems to be way in front of our health service, because they actually ask the person who's got this disease, or think they've got this disease, what occupation do you do? Well, it's not lost on me that I've been dealing with 5 people in various parts of the country that has been diagnosed with sarcoidosis, because it looks very similar on an X-ray scale or plate to silicosis. And telling IAC this, they don't want to know, because they don't deal with individual cases. But as we all sat in this room, we're all individuals, but we work in the environment with a lot of other people. So therefore, all those people put together, it's not an individual case. Is it? It's a cumulative case. But yet they won't accept it. And much the same as I've bent people's heroes, including Bill, for some time, is that the job descriptions, they don't want to change the job description to include coal miners, because there was no asbestos in coal mines, as Chris Kitchen told you earlier, which is an absolute fallacy. We were in London in July 23 and July 22, with the BEIS department, who now call themselves Net Zero and something else. And they wouldn't accept that there were any asbestos in coal mines because their lawyers had told them so. Much the same as the conversations that's coming out in workplaces that we wouldn't associate with asbestos-related disease, which is in the teaching profession, which is in hospitals and primary schools. And the age-old question that the DWP like to ask people, if they could present for a claim: what was your occupation? Well, I was a school student. Were you exposed to asbestos? Well, how the hell are you going to know that? Much the same as a coal miner who's asked when he attends for an assessment, were you exposed to asbestos? No, I think so. So we've got the ridiculous situation now, because we have the industrial disease payment or claim in the first instance, which then gets passed on because we're supposed to be signed up with the government backed us into a corner a long time ago. So there's far too many of you clogging up the legal system. So we're going to give you a scheme which is going to help you to get justice and payment a lot quicker than going to the courts. So our predecessors signed up to it. And we're told now that we can't resort back to common law because we signed up to this agreement. But the government can break that agreement anytime they want, can change the specification whenever they feel like it. And we're supposed to just accept it. And that's the sad part of it all. As John alluded to people being ill, and I've talked about it, and I'll continue to talk about it because it's something that's very close to my heart. Again, the people from the DWP are not interested that an old miner who's 79, he passed away first day in April. I put his claim in March 23 and told them he was seriously ill. And they jogged along, and they jogged along, and they jogged along, and eventually, he got a decision notice which took no notice of how ill he was. And then I am put in a dilemma. What do I do? Do I drag this bloke through an appeal that could take 12 months, 14 months? Because he hasn't got 12, 14 months. So I asked them, the DWP, how have you arrived at this decision? In the meantime, he gets taken in hospital, so I have to submit another claim for him because he's got worse. But they don't bother. And the sad part is he passes away. But before he passed away, I go on to the compensation side of it because I know what's going to happen. 3 letters I've written, 2 phone calls to find out from these people who are there to help us because they're professional people. And while we're talking about professional people, I'll just interject here, Bill, if you don't mind. Because we've heard from the Prime Minister that people, they're not ill, they need to go to work. We're not going to have them put on a sick note by a GP. And I'll say this at this meeting tonight, that I am fully of the opinion that the so-called healthcare professionals employed by the DWP are them people who's doing the assessment to see if somebody's fit to go to work or not a GP. And that's a very harrowing thought. You don't think Mr. Sunak's bothered about people that's ill, do you? No, he isn't. Otherwise, he'd have done something about it. There's nobody in this world, as far as I've ever met, that wants to be ill. And there's certainly nobody goes to work to be made ill. And possibly one of the things that we are guilty of as a trade union movement is we've got Workers' Memorial Day, and we sadly think about people that's passed away due to an accident, and this room's littered with the memories of it. There's a board down there which I asked you to have a look at before you move out, go out of this room. And it's got the names of 361 people killed in 2 explosions in 2 days. That's the nature of mining, or it was. And thankfully we got better than that. But we replaced it with something else, called industrial disease. And it hurts me to have to stand here in front of people in this meeting and start talking about other workers being exposed to industrial dust that causes such a problem to their health. It really does. And by the way, going back to the MP, who was Stephanie Peacock, all her office sent me a message saying that they were appalled that the statistic of 19,570 people who've been turned down for an industrial payment, they thought it was absolutely despicable. It didn't affect the minister who wrote to Stephanie Peacock one iota. She never said we ought to investigate this, she never said this is not right. But Stephanie Peacock's staff thought it wasn't right, because their work is just like we are. And that is what's wrong. And I'm afraid, and I've got to be a bit critical of the TUC in this, because when I started off this little talk, I mentioned about going back in time. Well, I think it was 2004, I think it was. We went to Birmingham for the very first Industrial Engineers Advisory Council public meeting that we'd ever attended. And that came about because we were invited by various solicitors. And I've told Bill this many a time, there isn't enough trade unionists get to these public meetings to keep people in the loop so they understand. So that we're not coming from a position of weakness like we are now, and having to ask people what they're doing about it, because otherwise they'd be forearmed and forewarned, and they'd be able to tell these politicians and the so-called experts what is wrong. We shouldn't be put in this position. Last year at the Orgy of Truth and Justice March, Mark Sawatka got up and talked about his dad, or his father-in-law, sorry, who's also got asbestosis. And he talked to me about it afterwards. He said, apparently you're the big lad from Yorkshire who knows a lot about this. I said, no, I'm just one of a load of lads that know a lot about it. But the trouble is that not enough people in the trade union movement know about it. And that's what we need to change. We need to change that because we can do things together, but not on his own. Remember that many of the trade union banners used to have the sticks on and they're all bound together and you couldn't break them. You start pulling them apart and break them on their own, it's quite easy. And that is the ethos that we have to go by. But we also need political will to change that mindset. And we also, it's not acceptable for people to be treated like they are. The final point I'm going to mention to you, because as I said, Stephanie's tried, we have a situation now where a lot of MPs don't want to talk to us as a trade union, and we have to go by the person that's in their constituency because political etiquette says they can't speak to us unless they've got their permission. What an absolute fallacy. We still represent thousands upon thousands of ex and retired miners up and down the county of Yorkshire, and as we're doing other areas in Durham and South Wales and Northumberland and Scotland. But yet these MPs will not talk to those representatives because they don't live in their constituency. Now that, to me, is just absolving your responsibilities. It's putting your head in the sand. And again, that can't be allowed to happen. We're coming up to an election, or general election. Well, make sure that the people who's put us in this position are kicked out, but also educate them that's coming in that they need to be better. Thanks very much for listening.
Well, thanks, Chris, and I know it's heartfelt what you just said, and long may you continue, mate. And I think you can be an inspiration for us all to carry on that fight, spreading the word, because it's not just about representing individuals; it's about informing the public of the dangers and the pitfalls of as if you do fall ill. You need people like you on their side. So thanks very much, Chris, for all that you've done over the years. And I have to say, sometimes I used to dread the phone calls, but I always came away thinking what a top bloke you were in terms of sticking to your guns and following up cases like no one I've ever come across. So we're going to widen it out a bit now, folks, and we're going to look at the education area. We've got two speakers from the National Education Union. And first up, Nicola Fitzpatrick from Regional Office is going to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nick Fitzpatrick, and I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here and a privilege to be in this historic building that I've now been in a number of times. So I'm Nick Fitzpatrick and I'm a Senior Regional Officer for the National Education Union, and I'm here tonight to represent and speak on behalf of the NEU, Yorkshire and Humber region. I'm proud to sit here alongside other unions from the movement, and I'm even prouder to represent NEU members working in schools and communities across Barnsley and in this region, trying to do the best job that they can in the face of chronic underfunding. I was thinking about asbestos, obviously, before I wrote my little piece for the meeting tonight. And I recall attending my first union conference in 2006 and being shocked to hear details shared about asbestos exposure and the number of school staff deaths since records began in the 1980s. I'm horrified, angry, and really ashamed that in 2024, our movement and our members are still having to deal with, fight and die from asbestos. The 2021 Joint Union Asbestos Committee report detailed that continuing government failure had led to a rise in school mesothelioma deaths. Pat on the back for being able to say that. It's a national disgrace that between 1980 and 2017, between 3,890 and 9,000 former pupils and staff died as a result of asbestos exposure. Devastatingly, we're all too familiar with the serious and life-threatening conditions of some of the school buildings our members and the children and young people they teach work in. Whilst the threat of asbestos remains, the new threat of RAC, reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, has closed schools, and it's threatened the health and safety of staff, children, young people and their communities. A building material that has a lifespan of 30 years, now beyond that period, is causing sudden building collapse, often with no warning of any underlying problems. The government has identified 234 schools where it is present. 6 of those are in the Yorkshire Humber region. Interestingly, in the initial government report into RAC, it said the material was asbestos free. A bit further into that report, it said don't go disturbing or prodding it because you never know, it might contain asbestos. Our members and those that we work for and serve represent and deserve better. So I'm here tonight in solidarity with all of us who are still fighting to make sure the buildings where future generations, future trade unionists, will be educated and they are properly monitored, safely built, and most significantly receive the investment they deserve and remain adequately funded. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that, Nicola, and that's some alarming statistics there from the school sector. And I suppose we'll now follow that up. Bob Groome is from the NEU. So the floor is yours, Bob.
Thank you. Have you ever asked your grandchildren what they do for a living? I asked my granddaughter and it changed my life. I said, so what do you do? She says, oh, I'm PA for a solicitor called Humberside. And Humberside is one of the leading campaigners for compensation for people suffering from mesothelioma. Actually, Pops, she says, a lot of your schools have got asbestos in. So I decided to look into it and I was absolutely horrified. So, I've been fighting for the removal of asbestos for many years now, thanks to her. I started campaigning in Norfolk around about 2015, 2016. And every time I went into a school, I asked to see the asbestos register. You'd be surprised at how many were left locked away somewhere, maybe in the site manager's office or in some cupboard in reception. Or how many were out of date? Or even worse, the person you're asking for didn't even know what it was. Because of that, I went to the press, ended up on ITV, ended up in the EDP, which is the Eastern Daily Press that covers all of Norfolk and Suffolk and Essex. When they did the piece, there's a piece of comments. Somebody put in there, we used to make snowballs out of asbestos and throw them all around to each other. It's never affected me. I've got involved with an asbestos support group sponsored by Aston's in Norwich. And this bloke come up to me. He said, "Oh, you a big apology." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I slated you in the press." Now I've got it. Yeah? Because don't forget, mesothelioma from exposure could take 10, 20, 30, 40 years to manifest. So the work I was doing got me an invite to DUAC. And DUAC is a Joint Union Asbestos Committee, and it's made up of representatives from all unions within the Education Secretary, and is chaired by Shelley Asquith from the TUC. The unions involved are the NEU, Unite, NASUWT, Unison, NAHT, GMB, ASCL, UCU and Community. DUAC are campaigning for the following: an independent review of government policy of managing asbestos rather than removing it. If the government can remove asbestos from the Houses of Parliament, from all the royal buildings, from all the council offices, surely that must be telling us something. Why aren't they removing it from other public buildings? Not just schools, but hospitals. DUAC are also asking for a government audit which collects and shares data centrally on the extent, type and condition in all education establishments. A funded programme for the phased removal of asbestos, starting with the most dangerous, to be completed by 2028. Government support for duty holders through provision of funded mandatory training. Proactive inspections by HSE to ensure education establishments are managing asbestos effectively. At the moment, the HSE will come and visit a school, do an inspection on the management process that the schools are running. Yeah? They give you a week's notice, let you know they're coming. Yeah? It's like when I was working as a teacher, if I heard a class making a rumpus because the teacher had gone out to do some photocopying, I'd stick my head around the door and go, quick, he's coming, and all sit bolt upright. So by the HSE giving schools notification they're coming, it gives the schools an opportunity to set up and try and get them. But even with notification, they've still found that the management of schools is not acceptable. And it's something we need to take into account. With regards to the training, this is something DUAC have asked for quite some time. The DFE has sidestepped us. The DFE have asked the duty to manage subgroup of the asbestos network to put together a proposal for asbestos management and awareness for all staff in all schools. Guess what? I'm a member of that group. So I could take it back to DUAC and we could get it done properly. Now the story doesn't end there. HSE show in 2021 alone, 23 teachers died from mesothelioma. Now, where we've got all these figures from teachers dying from mesothelioma, that'll only go up to the age of 75. Because if you die after the age of 75, your occupation is not recorded on your death certificate. So that data is not available. There could be many, many more people who have been teachers dying from mesothelioma, but because they're over the age of 75, their occupation has not been listed on the death certificate, so it has not become a statistic. Now let's look at figures from other sectors. Okay, in 2022, there was a review of asbestos management in the UK carried out by ATAC, which is Asbestos Testing and Consultancy, and NORAC, National Organisation of Asbestos Consultants. This is the first report of this kind. Taking into account that asbestos was banned 1999. Why has it taken that long to put a survey together to manage the condition of asbestos? Now, this report found that out of 128,761 buildings inspected, 100,660 of these buildings, which is 78%, contained asbestos. Of these buildings, there were 710,433 items of asbestos found. Of these items, 507,612 were recorded as having some level of damage. Of these damaged items, 120,629, or 24%, would be classed as requiring licensed work. So to be rectified by a licensed contractor, basically removed. Now, historic exposure to asbestos causes in this country around 5,500 deaths per year in this country. Grenfell Tower resulted in 72 deaths. Look at the amount of coverage that got. So to put this into context, the number of annual asbestos deaths is the equivalent of a Grenfell fire every 5 days. Every 5 days. And that doesn't get reported. It gets brushed off. And then you'll get a reporter come and take a story like the ones that did with me. Now, Harminder Baines took a company called Cape Industries to court for release of papers that showed they were aware of the dangers of asbestos. It went backwards and forwards, appeals, and ended up in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that Cape Industries had to release these documents into the public domain to help with any cases that were being dealt for compensation, to show that Cape Industries knew of the danger of asbestos. Unfortunately, I'm aware of paperwork that shows that Cape Industries knew the dangers of asbestos, as did the government of that time, as far back as 1942, when they were manufacturing filters for our soldiers' gas masks. Yeah? This is how corrupt our country has been over the years. It's not just happened with Boris, it's not just happened with Rishi, it's been going on for many, many years. So what do we do? What can we do? Just shout from the rooftops at every opportunity we get the dangers of asbestos. Make a nuisance of ourselves to any employer asking to see where their asbestos register is. Making sure that all of our colleagues know where asbestos is in their place of work. Making sure that they do not touch it, disturb it, move it, and then keep pushing and pushing till the employer removes it. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks, Bob. Again, the stats that you quoted are absolutely frightening, and it's incumbent on us all, I think, that we keep this campaign alive and, growing in our communities, because the dangers of it are absolutely horrendous. Just on the Cape Industries, before I finish, we had a vigil. They have an office in, I think it's Rotherham, on the outskirts of Rotherham Industrial Estate, and we had a vigil outside, a couple of hundred people, and Shelley Asquith came up and I've got to give it to Shelley. She's half my age at least, and she said, "Look, what's this? Vigil?" With shouted a few slogans. Shelley invaded the building, and we could hear her outside, inside, shouting at the guy who was in charge of the building. He did kind of abrogate his responsibility, saying it wasn't really a registered office. But apparently there has been some movement from Cape around training for people. So I'm sure Shelley will continue doing a really good job. But thanks very much for that, Robert.
Thank you.
I've written down some of the stuff which you've told us about. Last but not least, we have Nevyn Stevenson from the Yorkshire and Humberside Asbestos Victim Support Group. One of the best things I think we did at the TUC many years ago was try to bring a kind of service across the region which provided the same kind of quality representation for workers. We did it with the help of some trade union lawyers, and some unions put some money up as well, and we set up a region-wide service based on what was already going on in South Yorkshire with SARAG, and eventually we actually merged those organisations together to become the Yorkshire and Humber Asbestos service. So great to have you, Nev, and great to hear what you've done in the past few years, because it'll update me as well. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Bill. Thanks very much, everyone, for having me along today. I mean, before I go into what our charity, our support group does, I think just to follow on from what Bill and Bob were saying there on Cape, I was actually there at that the day we protested against Cape Intermediate Office of Goldthorpe is where their headquarters are, and they are now owned by a French firm called Altrad, who are one of the biggest multinationals. I think originally a scaffolding firm, but huge multi-billion-pound company. They purchased Cape in 2017 before Armin de Bains, the solicitor lead in London, effectively worked on behalf of the Asbestos Victim Support Group for them, and found documents that they were aware that they used asbestos products willingly. They knew the dangers, and they let workers face the consequence of that for years. So as part of that campaign, along with other support groups across the UK, we're asking Altrad now pay £10 million to mesothelioma research to try and right some of the wrongs. And I'm happy to share the details of that campaign and send that around to everyone, because ultimately we need all the support we can get. But yeah, I suppose I'm also here really to discuss what our charity does and give a bit of an introduction into what we do. So, as Bill said, my name is Nevyn Stevenson. I'm head of service at Yorkshire and Humberside Asbestos Support Group. Our charity was formed in 1999 in Sheffield and Rotherham, which is where SARAG comes from. Yorkshire and Humberside don't abbreviate quite as nicely, so we've stuck with SARAG. But ultimately, we began as a charity to campaign against and make people aware of the hazards of asbestos. But we also set up to provide practical support in terms of benefits and legal advice. And since 1999, we've helped over 4,000 people access 32.5 million in government benefits and compensations, which in some ways is great to illustrate the support that we offer, but it also illustrates the scale of the problem in just our region, never mind nationally. And as Bill said, over the past couple of years, we moved from Sheffield and Rotherham and started supporting individuals across the whole of the region, and now provide benefits advice, legal signposting, and one-to-one support through either bereavement support or in peer support groups. We currently do 7 different monthly support groups across the region, closest to you, Sheffield. And we're an active campaigner. unfortunately, the issues with the DWP, as Chris was mentioning, they're the things we all have to put up with every day. And the frustrating thing is, rightly so, they employ legal experts for the regulations of their applications. They employ medical professionals to judge an individual's disease, but they don't employ people with an industrial background to give context to those claims. And really that's the most frustrating element of it. They don't have the expertise in that area, which ultimately is the crucial area to make a decision. And it means individuals, like Chris was mentioning, are suffering, and they aren't compensated as they should be. So, just to go through, I suppose, what we did. So, looking at last year alone, we had 311 referrals and raised £4.3 million in government benefits and compensations. And on average, individuals are 13.5 grand better off as a result of the support our charity provides. And to be honest, we're pretty successful in the claims that we make. So 94% of claims are successful. But we are aware that people are missing out. And I think I'm here today as much as anything to raise awareness and make sure that people do receive the support that they're entitled to. So I wanted to give a couple of examples really as individuals who go on to develop asbestos-related conditions and were helped through the DWP and the systems that are So an example are an electrician employed by NCB who diagnosed with mesothelioma last year. This individual had a long career working for NCB, but began as an apprentice electrician and ultimately worked for about 25 years as an electrician. Now he was exposed to asbestos, breathing in dust and fibres, working as an electrician. And asbestos was prevalent in many areas he worked. For example, replacing asbestos boards, rerouting electrics from boilers, crawling through and over insulated pipework, and drilling through asbestos ceilings. We applied for industrial injuries disablement benefit and the Workers' Compensation Act, as well as attendance allowance. And this individual ultimately got just over £300 a week and just shy of a 20 grand lump sum as a result of that. And I think it's worth saying, despite that amount of money, generally speaking, individuals will access far larger amounts if their claims are successful in a civil court. So that providing that support is vital as well. And just similar, but another example. An individual working for a coal board as a plumber, engaged in a programme of maintenance, and this involved removal of asbestos guttering and floor pipes from hundreds of properties which were under his jurisdiction. And similarly, we applied for benefits and compensations, and we're successful in that. But I think, touching on what Chris said earlier, the amount of different trades and occupations in which asbestos exposure occurs is really far beyond what I think the DWP considers standard occupational hazards and exposure points. So I think, as I said, one of the things we are quite keen to do is raise the profile of our charity and try and support as many people as we can. Because if we look at them statistics, in terms of 5,000 deaths from asbestos-related conditions in the UK each year, there are so many of them people who are missing out on the support that they rightfully should be receiving, whether that's through the benefit system, emotional support or legal signposting. And certainly members of any of the unions that are represented here today would be more than welcome to access our service and hopefully we can help them as much as we can. Now, I'd mentioned that we were a campaigning charity, we are, and I think you quite rightly mentioned rat concrete a moment ago. I think it's worth saying that all these public buildings that were built after the Second World War were at concrete, were all built in a period in which asbestos use was wide. And so if RAG is crumbling, and it is, then it's going to expose asbestos. And all these buildings, you're asking people to work in these buildings that ultimately aren't safe. So 300,000 non-domestic buildings and 87,000 public buildings in the UK contain asbestos. Now, there's a register that lists that, but there's not necessarily knowledge as to what forms are asbestos, what sort of condition it's in. And ultimately, whose responsibility that is to either remove or take care of. And that is certainly the message I'll be getting out there. I'll be in Barnsley tomorrow, and Donny Saturday morning at Workers' Memorial Day. And as a charity, I'm more than happy to work with any union and other unions to try and get that message out there, because I think since 2017, 147 health and education workers have died due to exposure to asbestos. As a charity, we've seen, even over the past few years, those traditional occupations like building trade, steelworks, generally speaking, older blokes, we've seen a shift in the individuals that are referred to our charity. And it is non-traditional sectors, public sector workers, females. And that's ultimately they're the victims of the decades to come. Until asbestos is removed from all buildings, that danger is still going to be there, and people are still going to need our help. In an ideal world, I won't work for an asbestos victim support group. And I never had ambition of doing that. But it's there to help people, and hopefully one day we'll not need to exist. And I think, as Chris said, ultimately for that to happen, it means everyone working together, every union, everyone working in the same direction, with the same message. And maybe with a change of government, there's an opportunity with some MPs like Jon Trickett and others to work towards a world where people aren't going to work, and worried that exposure to substances is going to mean that they're going to be ill someday. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, Nev, and again, thanks very much for all you do. I know that I've come across quite a few people every time who've got some great support from SARAG and the wider Yorkshire group, and lots of people who are involved in that do some really sterling work, and it's much needed as well as representation. It's about keeping alive that the issues that is still there and is still going to affect people in the years to come. I think we've got some time to have some questions if anybody wants to ask them from the panel. Bob?
It's not a question, it's more of a statement, Bill.
Okay, mate.
I'm Bob Fitzpatrick, Hatfield, anyway. We deal with doing industrial injuries, disablement benefit claims, and I've had a chat, and this has been ongoing now for the last 2.5 years, and he come in with a letter from his consultant telling him he got pneumoconiosis. So I put in the claims form in, sent it off, and you think it's a slam dunk, he's going to get an award for industrial injuries for pneumoconiosis. Then it turns out that his consultant says he ain't got pneumoconiosis. So he took his letter back to his consultant, who blatantly denied ever writing letter. So one of the problems I think what we're getting as well is medical profession turning around and saying to us that the pneumoconiosis because coal mines are closed don't exist now. Same as what your guys are getting with asbestos apart from the schools, obviously, and other public buildings. And with asbestos in coal mines, we're finding it very hard to prove that we've got asbestos or had asbestos in coal mines. And the other sad point about it is, if you get a chap diagnosed with pneumoconiosis, they're awarding 10%. So then you find it because the guy's bedridden, he's on oxygen. So they give him an uplift to 80%, which increases his lump sum payment, etc., etc. for industrial injuries benefit claim, but the actual lump sum what he can claim is still paid at the initial 10%, which I find an absolute disgrace, and that's me being very polite, believe it or not. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else? Any questions? Yeah, I'll bring you back in. Yeah. We'll take a couple of questions and ask the panel to respond.
I'm Jimmy Kelly, Yorkshire anyway. Basically, I mean, I came across asbestos as a young lad, and there were some that died in the pit. And it came to, it was an overman, they were one of the gaffers, if you want. And he worked in a factory in Leeds for about 2 weeks. But he moved, I think they moved up from down south somewhere. And the base themselves in Leeds, and then moved to Doncaster, where he got a job in the pit. And he progressed from there. The good boy, but local secretary of the Labour Party and everything. They were a good comrade. Anyway, he just disappeared from work. And we discovered that this 2 weeks that he'd been working in Leeds, some 15, 16 years before, he picked up a bit of asbestos in his lung, and it killed him. You know, and it was shocking to us all, because he was quite a fit, active guy in the village and all the rest of it. The other point I'm going to make was, and this is done more recently, I'm chairman of a local community centre that's well used, it's a local hall. And during COVID, we got a bit of grant money, because everybody got grant money for everywhere, didn't they? And we had a stage, and we wanted to remove the stage. And at the side of the stage, there were a couple of single rooms that you had to go through a door to. Like saying, I don't know, that there'll be a term for the actors use. But anyway, there was set of tiles down there. We got the stage removed, and we got new flooring and all the rest of it. And we wanted to do these bits at the side. Anyway, I said, well, look, I'm going on next week, but when I come back, I'll get them floor tiles up, get rid of them. In the meantime, they've got a company out to have a look to put new floor tiles in. And lo and behold, these floor tiles are asbestos, and I never knew just how prominent asbestos is in our lives. You know, a floor tile, for God's sake, and I thought, well, I could have been digging them up. But when it up, I think we paid something like 4 or 5 grand, and they were only, I bet they were only about a dozen of these things. And I always thought about this guy that I told you about prior, this Fred Cager. And I just thought, well, I wonder about the people that were laying on this stack a lot of them years ago, because this building must be 40, 50, probably 60-year-old. And I just think, I wonder what them people went through, because it wouldn't have been packed up in packaging that we know now. You know, it'd be simple boxes, and there'd be broken ones and all the rest, and they'd be bleeding it out, and you just wonder what the quality of life they had. And I mean, here we are, all these years later, after they discovered just how bad asbestos was. And as a gentleman over there said, you know, they've hid it under the carpet forever, and probably the carpet's got asbestos in it as well. So, I mean, that was just a generalisation of what I wanted to say, like, because it really hits home when you realise just where it is and how common it was, because it was like the miracle material to build with, insulate with, do whatever. I mean, when I started in the 90s, we were all steam winding, because you coal, you look at coal, you boil it up, you in the boiler. That were all insulated with asbestos. All the packs were insulated with asbestos, and then we put red lead on top of that. And guess who used to do that? That were apprentices, the mechanical apprentices. You just think the stuff that they were sticking in our land and saying, you'll be all right, everything's fine. And then, as I say, you hear about these tales of people dying. Exposure, 2 weeks after that. Unbelievable.
Thanks, Jim. 2 really good examples. I'll take Chris next, and then I'll ask our panel to come back in. Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Sorry, panel, I'm not wanting to open the meeting at all. It was something that, as Chris said, I dropped it on the floor, and I thought there might be an after the time, so I'll pick it back up a bit. It's a question and a statement. We don't think there's better anyone at all. Recently, a review was carried out by the Industrial Engineers Advisory Council about pneumoconiosis and the prescription for it and the description for it. And hidden away at the back is Appendix 2, and I'll be interested if the panel have heard of this. Notes on the individual pneumoconiosis. A. Asbestos. Asbestosis is diffuse lung fibrosis caused by one of the commercial forms of asbestos, principally chrysolite white asbestos and the amphibole mineral fibers amosite brown asbestos. Radiologically, it is characterized by a usual interstitial pneumonia, brackets UIP-like pattern, with subpleural basal predominant reticular abnormalities that are often associated with honeycomb change and traction bronchiectasis. Now that's a big, I'm really not trying to be clever when I'm saying this, because there's a horrible hidden meaning in this. Because for years, when we presented a case with interstitial pulmonary fibrosis, that characterization, UIP-like pattern, was trotted out and used with the terminology idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which means it's of unknown origin. And I've even got the paper here that was produced from IAP in direct response to a question that we tabled in 2006, which there is no evidence available that would allow separate prescription of interstitial fibrosis in McCall workers. However, the evidence that is available suggests that interstitial fibrosis in coal workers is nearly always associated with changes that would allow the disability from the fibrosis to be taken into account as part of the assessment for coal workers' pneumoconiosis or chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Well, let me tell you, that never happened. Because the UIP pattern was put down as idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And it didn't matter whether everybody had got a finding from the doctor of COPD and pneumoconiosis. It wasn't added to it to make a finding of a disability. It was ignored. And two lads who had the misfortune to work with me at the bit passed away with this. And I fought the claims and I lost, based on the UIP pattern. And I brought it up tonight because I'm hoping that people have got their own conferences to go to, because this should be shared out amongst everybody who's in a working profession, and even in the domiciliary profession as well, because I think that's disgraceful. I wrote to IAC and asked them for an explanation, but of course, we're not going to get one. Chris has managed to secure a Zoom meeting with them in May, but I bet you this won't be on the agenda, because we'll just be talking about coal workers and pneumoconiosis. But this, to me, means if it affects us, it affects all the people in this room. And how they can change their opinion like that. And I said the experts earlier, didn't I? Well, how can we trust the so-called experts with 15 letters after the name when you see something like that? That's the question for the panel. So, that will tell me the answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Well, there's a few points raised, so I think Nicola wants to go first.
Oh, I wasn't sure. I think it was you first.
Was it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Right, first, a couple of points. With what you've just said there, Chris, have you thought of getting in touch with Harmony Baines. Right? Cape Industries has got governments in their hands. Yeah, if she can take them to court to get them to release the documents that they've been made to release, yeah, is it worth having a chat with her to see what she can do for you? Yeah, and to do for your members. Okay. Something else you mentioned earlier, Chris, that about the government having people assess whether you're sick or not, who are not actually GPs. My first wife, she was assessed by a group called Atos. Yeah. Because she could touch her toes, they deemed her fit for work. She was dead within 3 months. They didn't even bother to look at her medical records and find out that she had terminal cancer. Yeah. Atos tried to put in for the contract to do Norfolk County's HR. The moment I told them that, they kicked out. Didn't even get a second interview. And the last thing I wanted to mention is about where asbestos is. Where it's, for most of us, we've got in our homes, we've got in our workplace. Yeah, marley tile floor tiles, putty in windows, mastic in door frames, Artex on your ceilings. That's just in your house. Soffit boards, garage roofs. Yeah. In schools, you've got ceiling tiles, boiler insulation, boiler seals, other seals in kitchen areas. Who remembers the blast heaters from your school, your classroom at school? Yeah. Asbestos boards inside them. Yeah. What we have to realise is that it's not going to get any better unless it's removed. Asbestos, being a fibrous material, breaks down. So it's loads and loads of fibres held together with resin, and it breaks down. And it only takes just one fibre to be inhaled by an unfortunate victim, and that can lead to mesothelioma later in life. Just one fibre. All asbestos types are bad. All asbestos types can give you mesothelioma. Now, with regards to mines, you mentioned about the steam windings. Yeah. Don't forget, you would have also had on the cars going on the rounds under mine, on the brakes, with Froda, made of asbestos. So that would spread right through mine, won't it? So if some of the victims had just breathed in one fire, could have easily come from that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and it was really about the exposure, and that you mentioned someone that had just had exposure for 2 weeks. I think the thing that I find terrifying is, before I started to work for the NEU, I taught in Addersley for 23 years. And as a young teacher, I had no idea what was on those display boards that I repeatedly put staples in and out of, hoiked staples out of, ceiling tiles came down and we'd quite happily put them back. It's an old building that I worked in for 23 years. So I might have been exposed to it and don't know. Loads of people might have been exposed to it and never known. And of course, some of those buildings aren't even there now. So the fact someone can trace that exposure back is good, but there'll be many people that absolutely can't and never will, and might not even know about this. So I think I just wanted to raise the point that actually there are many people out there, schools, hospitals, who just might not know that they've even been exposed to it, and that to me is shocking and really terrifying. So I just kind of wanted to raise that point, really.
Thanks, Nicola. I think Nev's going to pick up Chris's last point.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of points there. I think what I'd say is first, over this 25-year period our charity's been going, we've recorded cases, and if you're representing somebody who, and you're getting a negative result from DWP, we'd be more than happy to assist, look in our records and see if we've come across anyone working in the same environment. That works in legal claims all the time. If we can get somebody else with a similar recollection who can effectively provide a statement and support this individual's records and statement, then it might be that we can help in that respect. So if ever you need, please get in touch. On the fibrosis as alone, I think my understanding is medical professionals diagnose an individual with asbestosis as lung fibrosis with, and it'll say lung fibrosis with significant exposure to asbestos. Now, problem is some medical professionals, Sheffield Teaching Hospital been a brilliant example. They really push it in their diagnosis letter, and the results we get from individuals with asbestosis in that we'll see usually Dr. Barbara Sheffield in general are significantly better than other regions in Yorkshire and Humberside. And I think ultimately that goes down to their training and them producing on them letters the things that the DWP need to see to make an award. So part of what we want to do is try and raise that awareness and get through to medical professionals as well. And hopefully, Chris, that'll also help people you're representing. And again, we're more than happy to work with you and try and come to some solution with that, because the more people getting the help, the better. Really.
Okay, thanks, Nev. Is there any more questions before we finish the meeting? I'm not sure whether there's any online.
There's been nothing on screen.
No, I have had a couple of messages saying the sound's not too good, but maybe if we've recorded it, has it been recorded? Yeah.
I think so.
That might be, something that people can look at again, if that's the case. But I'd like to just say, I think it's been a really useful meeting. I've certainly made a lot of notes and learnt a lot about the dangers that are still out there and continuing to grow. I've got three of my family members as teachers, so I'll be having a word with them when I see them at the weekend. But certainly, thanks very much for turning up. Thanks to Chris and the NUM for providing the building and the venue, and thanks very much to Catherine from Wakefield and Banners Held High for getting this group together and coming up with some really, really good information and to inspire us all that campaign has to do. Thanks very much to all the speakers. It's been really interesting listening to you all. And with that, I'll close the meeting and thank you all very much for attending. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. You're on home for you then?
I'm on train.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds.
10 to try and use public where I can.
Yeah. So when it works, public transport.
Yeah. It weren't too bad on the way over. It was a little hiccup, but I got it. No, I live in Preston. Yeah.
What's where do you go then? Do you have to get to Manchester first?
Sheffield and then Manchester.
3 trains now.
Yeah.
I hope that was, I think that was a very useful discussion. That was.
Thanks very much for that.
Yeah. That amount of knowledge that we've all got here is a really important thing.
That's
I hope
all I do.
something else.